Be nice. Oh my God. Good God, Sarah. Wow, he was thirsty. Okay.
Closer in just a little bit. I'm just going to go over all the boring stuff and the ground rules before we get to the house, so we're all on the same page. My name is Will. I'm going to be your ranger and guide today, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the National Park Service to the Vanderbilt Mansion. As we go through the house, consider this has been in your National Park Service since 1940. It's actually one of the older historic sites in your national park system. So keep that in mind that these items, some of which are 500 plus years old, are irreplaceable. And even if they're reproduction copies, they are expensive reproduction copies. So help us keep our collective burden down, help preserve these things for future generations so that some of the younger guys here can come back with their kids and their grandkids and still see the same stuff. So be aware of the space. There's no leaning, no touching on any of the objects or the furniture. As I just mentioned, only water is allowed inside the house. Anything else, please store away now. And you're welcome to record video and take photos. Just do me a favor, if there's a flash setting on these devices, turn that off now. There are objects of art in the house, again, some of which are hundreds of years old, so we want to preserve that. And you'll note that it's darkened intentionally inside with the shades and curtains drawn to prevent sunlight from even getting in. So double check all those settings before we go inside, and you can go crazy and click away at that point. Now, as we go through the house in a little bit, we're going to head to the front and share some history about the family, about the property before we get inside. And then we're going to go through 3 levels today. We'll go through the front door, see the first level, which is the living room, dining room, and entertainment spaces. Then we're going to go upstairs to the second level to see all the bedrooms inside the house where the Vanderbilts slept, their guests would have slept. And then we're going to go down the servant staircase to the basement, where we're going to see the servants' area of the house, including the kitchens, their working area. Talk a bit more about their day-to-day and their experience. And this is where the tour will conclude. So keep that in mind that every level you go to, that is your only opportunity to see those spaces. So make sure you do a full circuit, see all these spaces, ask all the questions you'd like while we're there, before we head upstairs and before we head downstairs. So treat it as one way as we go through the home. If at any point you need to leave for whatever reason, it's easiest to do so from the first level as soon as we get in the house, or at the end of the tour towards the basement once we're in the servants' realm. While we're on the second floor, since the Vanderbilts did not consider tours, let's see, they constructed this in the 1890s, so I'm going to say this is 130 some odd years down the line now at this point. So there are no fire exits from the second level, so we have to stay together as a group for safety reasons. We have to leave as a group. That is going to pretty much conclude the tour at that point. So keep that in mind. If you need to leave, do so from the first level or the basement. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck with me for about 8 minutes, so be ready for that commitment on the second floor while we're looking at those bedrooms here. Now, that's the basic cadence. That's all the big rules I got out of the way there. Any burning questions about that so far? Or any other curiosities about the house or the property or anything else standing out to us? All right, so it's my job here to answer any questions and fill in any gaps that you kind of see as we go through. Feel free to sing out at any point. That's one of my favorite parts of the job here. But if we're all set on that and the rules, let's head over to the front of the house and we'll get started.
Good morning.
Good morning.
the top of the arch, and then they stripped it several years ago. It's awesome. But the NPS at the top was
Let's find a spot in front of me here. Watch out for any landmines from our friends, the Canada Goose. Looks like a few of them. Yeah, wherever's comfortable for you. We're going to be outside about 5 minutes, and let me know if I need to go a little bit louder. We have some of our other fun park ranger friends attending to some tree situations right now, so let me know if this is not enough for you. I can always increase volume. And as we walk over, any questions percolate down? Anything standing out to us so far? All right, so this is going to be a really easy or really hard tour. Let's see how easy it is. So again, to reiterate, my name is Will, and again, I'd like to welcome you all to the Vanderbilt Mansion on behalf of the National Park Service. This home standing behind me is the seasonal home of Frederick and Louise Vanderbilt. Frederick is one of many grandchildren of the Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt who would start this fortune. If you were back at the visitor center looking at the family tree, he's the one at the top with the pretty righteous mutton chops for the most part. This Cornelius Vanderbilt, born in the 1790s and dead by 1877, would grow up in an environment of a new America where you have pretty much no regulations, no rules for the most part. You have these various captains of industry, tycoons, and robber barons corner their own markets and pretty much make as much cash as they could off of it. The Vanderbilts here make their money in shipping and transportation. Here specifically, think steamboats and ferries, and then down the line, the New York Central Railroad. For its time, the New York Central was one of the largest companies in North America. Thank you guys. And expanding throughout the entirety of the Northeast here, connecting the Great Lakes to the East Coast here. Very convenient for his grandchild Frederick here. We have the Hudson line for the New York Central running at the edge of the property as well. And as you can imagine, moving things from A to B is still a pretty good business, especially back in this time, and railroads were one of the best ways to do it on the continent here. So Cornelius Vanderbilt, when he dies in the 1870s, is one of these first industrialists to crack $100 million, which we're talking 1870s dollars, which at the time is about 5% of what the U.S. Treasury has in circulation. So put that in today's terms, we're talking a lot of money in the era before regulations, before OSHA, before really anything that could restrain these guys for the most part. So keep that in mind as we go through the house here, that this is not going to be the home of your typical American for the most part. Down the line, 2 more generations, this wealth would essentially double. We have 8 Vanderbilt siblings between Frederick and his brothers and sisters, worth about $210 million by 1885, after their father passed away, doubling that fortune. Now, you have 8 Vanderbilt siblings, you have $200 million between them. What do they then start to do with this?
Spend it.
Yes, we're looking at it. It's right behind me here. So between them, they would build 43 of these mansions throughout the United States, many of them being seasonal homes. They're kind of caught up in this very extravagant lifestyle, these opulent homes to throw these grand parties. Here, though, this is meant to be a smaller, more intimate space. So Frederick and Louise settle with a 54-room, 45,000 square foot home with only 14 bathrooms. For them, their occasional guests, and 20 staff members to cater to their lifestyle. Inside that house here, this entire lifestyle would not be possible without people to do the day-to-day cleaning and cooking and taking care of things like the gardens and trees. They actually had another 40 people working just outside, like some of our staff behind me here, just to maintain the grounds and gardens year-round for them. Typically, they're only here during the spring and the fall, and you can see why they're not really here during the summertime, pretty hot and muggy. They don't have air conditioning yet in this time period, but the next best thing, which is simply building a house somewhere in New England and going there for the summertime. So you might be familiar with communities today like Newport, Rhode Island, or Bar Harbor, Maine, or the Adirondacks. This is where many Vanderbilts, Frederick included, would have estates at various points to travel to. Particularly Newport, Rhode Island, I imagine somebody here has been to the Breakers or the Marble House. Oh, yeah. Some of these grand homes here. Yeah, so you've seen some of his brother's places. There's one estate there called Rough Point, which is the Doris Duke estate today. That was originally built by Frederick Vanderbilt, and it's at the very end of Bellevue Avenue, even smaller amongst those houses here. So yeah, you've been there before? Yeah, so Frederick here seems to be a bit more low-key for Vanderbilt. He's a bit shyer, and he wants to really pretty much, entertain his wife at these parties, but for the most part, likes to keep to himself and to close friends and family. This is pretty much the case for Frederick and Louise. They would move in here by 1899 after they constructed this house, and lived here seasonally from the 1890s up until her death in 1926. At that point, Frederick would sell these other properties I've mentioned, keeping one townhouse in New York City as well, and living here as his primary residence for the rest of his life until his death in 1938. He'd basically be like many commuters in the Hudson Valley today, with the key difference, he would ride on the railroad that he partially owns with his brothers on the directorship. He has his own private railway siding at the edge of this property next to the main line of the track, and a luxury Pullman car, which one ranger describes as having the equivalent of your own private helicopter pad for its day, where he can send his friends on and ride that down to Grand Central Terminal in New York, where some of his main offices were. That building was constructed during his and his brother's time as directorship, completed by 1913. So if you're walking through there today, you're walking through the halls of Vanderbilt's. So from 1938, we see Frederick die. He's 82 years old at that point, worth about $78 million. I've mentioned this fantastic home, other residences, this extravagant lifestyle. What have I not mentioned yet, though?
Kids.
Yeah, no kids. Yeah, so Frederick and Louise died childless. And who to leave it to? It turns out there's a niece. Her name is Margaret Van Allen Brugier. She's a regular visitor here. She's a kind of queen of Newport society at this point, and has a home in Newport and a townhouse in New York. And really, when she inherited this home, did not have a need for it. It turns out that she is not an outdoorsy, country-going gal, and really didn't need this estate here, simply because this home behind me was built for country pursuits. Unfortunately, you will not find ballrooms or swimming pools or bowling alleys or any of these other very specific entertainment spaces indoors, because you're meant to be outside while visiting Frederick and Louise Vanderbilt, sailing in the Hudson River, maybe riding horses. They have friends up the road at the Mills Mansion who they would play golf with, and that golf course still exists today, so you can check on that later on if you'd like. So this niece does not want to maintain the property. By this point, you have a number of taxes at this point, income taxes, and just the basic upkeep for this property is very expensive by the 1930s. So she puts it on the market, taking a few things with her. So we don't have everything inside the house that was the Vanderbilts, but all the rejects are left behind for a sale. And you all could have actually purchased over 700 acres here in the Hudson Valley, which includes over a mile of riverfront. This lovely Beaux-Arts style home behind me with modern amenities like electricity, indoor plumbing, a forced air heating system for $350,000. Yeah, quite the value for that, considering that it cost Frederick and Louise in the 1890s about $2.25 million in 1890s dollars to purchase this property, build this house, and most expensive of all, to furnish it as well. 2/3 of that cost is just the furnishings you're going to see inside today. But it turns out people did not want to pay for the upkeep. Even if you had this type of money at this time, nobody wants to put it into the house here. So for 2 years, this languishes on the market, actually, and she's unable to sell it. So by 1940, you have her starting to entertain developers for this property. She sells off about 500 acres of farmland to some of these developers, and you can go visit those very nice residences in Hyde Park today. But she's reluctant to sell this estate because she had such great memories here. And this estate is historic. It dates back to the 1760s, actually, to the Bard family. If you're familiar with Bard College up the road, this is the same family itself, and wants to preserve a lot of the historic tree specimens here, some of which were planted in the late 1700s. One guy in particular in Hyde Park who's a big fan of trees really wants to help preserve this property, and would lobby Congress on her behalf to make this into a national park site in 1940. Some of you may have been to his home already. I have a sneaking suspicion I took some of you through it already, actually. Just down the road, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, wanting to preserve this piece of Hyde Park history and what he considered one of the oldest manicured lawns in the country, probably New York State. Some of these tree specimens are well over 250 years old, and he wants to preserve that, and figures, well, since she's in such an interesting situation, we can get a Vanderbilt mansion on the cheap on top of that here. So this deal is worked out. By July of 1940, this is turned over to your National Park Service, opening the grounds to the public, and then by December, opening the house for tours. We purchased all of this, 211 acres, the house and furnishings we're about to see, for $1, and in return she gets a pretty nice tax credit. I don't believe she paid income taxes up until the 1950s, actually. And so she's able to get this off of her hands, preserve it for her aunt and uncle as a memorial. Roosevelt in particular able to preserve the grounds and trees as icing to that cake. This is the only Vanderbilt mansion in your National Park Service. If you've been to other Vanderbilt homes, those are privately maintained by other organizations or still owned by descendants of the family. This is the only one under the purview of your federal government. And because she left a lot of the things behind, this is one of the few intact homes from this time period that still exist in North America today, giving us a very authentic view of their furnishing styles and some of their day-to-day choices inside the house here. But I do challenge you as we go through the home to keep in mind that this is, again, not your average American's home from this time period. I would argue not even your average industrialist home. So keep in mind what's happening and broader society in this time, what is happening to most families in America, what are their day-to-day jobs like, what is their situation, because that is the main purpose of this park being preserved, is not because of the home or Vanderbilt or wealth or industry, but the Gilded Age as a whole during this time period. So consider what is happening in America from the 1870s to the First World War, changes in demographics and technology, homes like this being made, businesses like this being constructed, and what is everyone else's situation during this time period as well. But you did pay for a house tour, and you've been very patient with me so far. We're about to go do that right now. But any questions so far before we get inside?
Yeah, you
Go for it.
mentioned.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
was just wondering, does the family actually still, is it?
Pretty much no. So it was a one-time sale, 1940, from this Nice to your Park Service, and it's been ours ever since. Any Vanderbilts that have visited, and there's maybe up to 1,000 direct descendants of Cornelius around today, they basically had to pay for a tour like you guys. So, yeah, anyone else?
You
Yeah, go.
mentioned central heat. Was it coal or gas?
It was coal-fired, yeah. So they had a
Coal.
forced air heating system. There are 2 coal-burning furnaces in the basement, which looked like they were just boilers tugged from a large locomotive, which would make sense considering how these guys made money. But yeah, you'll see vents and registers scattered throughout the house. And since it's coal-fired, we tried retrofitting modern HEPA filters on them to catch some of that coal ash. So you'll see those spread throughout the rooms. But there's also 22 fireplaces throughout the house, all fully functional, but more for a country aesthetic. The one in the main hall was really the only one they ever fired up. So, yeah. Other questions?
Electricity. When did they get electricity?
Yeah, this is from the get-go here in the house. So when they built this home, originally it was supposed to be gas-fitted, but they changed their mind halfway through the construction of this home in like 1896, 97, and he calls up one of Edison's companies, and they built for him his own personal generator. This is before it was commercially available to many rural communities like Hyde Park. So the edge of the property, we all drove over that white bridge today. The Crum Elbow Creek flows further down to a generator, a hydroelectric generator that powered this property with underground cables connecting to all the buildings. So locals actually at this time, when they opened up in 1899 to start living here full time, they'd line up at the edge of the property waiting for them to turn the lights on. Yeah, one ranger describes it like maybe seeing Vegas for the first time. That's how novel this was. Yeah. Other questions? All right, so have your tickets ready. I'm going to check those as we walk inside the house. Remember all those rules I mentioned earlier. No leaning, no touching, no flash photography, and only water out while we're inside the house. Once I have checked your ticket, feel free to wander the first floor at your own pace. Make sure you see all these rooms, ask all the questions you'd like. Once you're done, please find me by the main staircase. We'll share a few more stories before we pop upstairs.
If I can just check real quick. Yeah, left and right doesn't matter. Just make sure you see everything. I'm fine if you have any questions, and we'll talk a little bit more about these spaces in a few minutes.
Oh, that's a nice piano. It's on both sides.
Second Amendment.
Home security.
Look at that ceiling.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, this is very much characteristic of like Morgan's, the Rockefeller, and other exactly. Yeah, it's all kind of late French style, so it's kind of a mix of everything. So you see Revolution, you see French salons, Renaissance. I would kind of describe it as making this day is hiring experts in architecture design and saying how that instrument. Yeah, this is all marble we're looking at here. So what's fun is that is supporting the house itself. It's not built there. It's all steel superstructure that's like this guy's just purely for design.
Is there any room where you can like relax without having to worry about breaking nice things?
Today?
Oh no, I mean in the old days.
Well, so I mean, during their lifetime, Frederick and Louise Vanderbilt would often spend time in the smoking room here. So it's the one with the animal heads, the guns, and the steins. They treated that like a family room. They called it the den. I guess that oversized kind of plushy furniture is a bit more comfortable than most of these other rooms, and that's where a lot of the staff rate that they would spend time in each other's company, reading, handling letters and correspondences. And I imagine if they had like Sudoku or crossword, they'd be doing that together too.
Were they split kind of like men in one room, women in the other, or were they not really like that?
A lot of Louise's spaces tend to have more French design, kind of like the sitting room across the hall called the reception room with all the furniture and the mural up top. And you'll see her bedroom is very much styled after Queen's chambers in like Versailles or Mont-de-Marsan in France. But a lot of his spaces have this darker, more Gothic style going to it. But yeah, you do kind of see the split up of spaces. Most of the time, if someone really important is coming through, because apparently that reception room is really uncomfortable, that's where Mrs. Vanderbilt might take some of these high-class ladies to really impress them with literal gilding on that wall in there. But most of the time, they might just, the gentleman might spend a few minutes in the smoking room, having their cigars and brandies and all that. And then ladies will more often than not be in the living room just waiting for everyone to get back together for parlor games before going to bed.
Playing some piano and
yeah, exactly. They might bring a bandstand or card games like bridge, things like that.
interesting.
Did they have musicians come in? Or
They did, yeah. No, so from my reading, I haven't come across anything that indicates the Vanderbilts played music. It's not impossible because we know so little about them really in the first place. They didn't really keep diaries or personal memos or anything like that. But we do know that they did hire musicians to come in. So.
There's the Villard Mansion in Manhattan. He was the Northern Pacific Railroad owner, and that there's a specific music room for chamber music. But I think that was specifically because he wanted that. Yeah.
Yeah, here, I mean, it's more of, I don't call it a boilerplate design, but like it's very much meant to be a country home where it's kind of for incidental entertainment in the evening, whereas most of the time they're going to be out on one of these porches or outside.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
Of course.
Check it out.
I think that's it. Yeah, that's the one. Two fireplaces.
Nice ceilings. Oh my god.
Everything was dark and gilded and fancy and lots of design.
Yeah, so it's
And
more
right
for
after
her to
that,
entertain, tea ceremonies and the ladies here, but not really often used based on some servants' accounts because that furniture is very uncomfortable apparently. So only if someone was really important would they bring you back there because they really wanted to impress you. But there's literal gilding on the wall there. Some of that's
that was
original
a
salon
really
style
popular
furniture. It's
color
like
for
Marie Antoinette or
our
Louis XIV.
style home.
So
People went with suddenly went bright. They were tired of the dark.
I like it.
yeah, so these large pieces in the ante rooms, as you go to the they're called cassone. They're basically Italian oak chests from the Renaissance. Yeah, basically. I mean, apparently families like the Medici would get so many gifts for their brides and daughters that they had to have these large chests to store it all in. Here, the Vanderbilts use it as decoration, which honestly is a good rule for any question you're going to ask me. What's that? Why is it there? It's purchased by, by interior decorators for just like art, essentially.
Did they bring, I won't go on, but like the fireplaces are so ornate and Like sometimes a wealthy person will find it in some church in Europe and then ship it here. Like, was a lot of this just made special?
No,
from scratch?
I'd say most of the items that you see are imports. However, it's not the Vanderbilts going out and antiquing, being like, oh, I want this miniature tapestry or something like that. It's really them hiring out to McKim, Mead White. Stanford White really is the main interior decorator for most of the spaces in this house. And essentially, the way as I come to understand it is not quite like going through a catalog, but essentially,
Sort of.
here's the style we want for these rooms, and most of these decorators and architectural firms have warehouses all
Yes.
throughout the United States waiting for commissions like this. So, 1860s, 1870s, and 80s, all of these guys pretty much have scoured Europe, going to all these kind of broke European noble houses,
Right.
buying up their stuff, just so that they can keep living that lifestyle, and then waiting for Nouveau Riche industrial American families like the Vanderbilts to want to recreate the same thing here and be accepted in wider society. So that's why everything here has a distinctly European feel in here, kind of a mix and match of Italian, German, Spanish, French, whatever. But you will see exceptions to that. Pretty much anything that has a connection to noble or royal families. So we see these two giant foible holes on either side of the entryway. Those are Ming Dynasty vases, so dating to China in the 1600s. You'll see an even larger one on the way up to the second level as well. In the dining room on the smaller table to the right, that's often where Frederick and Louise Vanderbilt have their meals. You only use the big table for the really formal dinners. There's a Japanese punch bowl essentially there that has the chrysanthemum seal of the Japanese emperor. So anything that has these connections are really
Right.
displayed prominently here in the house. Because the Vanderbilts, they are kind of gatekeeped from the really good parties from old money families like the Roosevelts, or you're familiar with this time period like Edith Wharton, like the Astors or the Livingstons. They're really essentially buying their way into society. And something really important in visiting homes like this is that they are not designed to be comfortable. They are designed to show off how the business is doing. So keep that in mind. 1890s, when this is complete, this is what they want you to think of the New York Central as you're walking through spaces like this.
Wow.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
There are two pictures in that room.
Yes.
One of them is Theodore Roosevelt.
Yes. The other one is his Vice President and 27th President, William Howard Taft, as well. So we're talking 1900 to about 1912 or so for these guys. Frederick Vanderbilt's in his 50s and is a heavy Republican donor, I think, is not super surprising considering the wealth we're talking about here in this time period for sure. And those are signed copies sent to Mrs. F.W. Vanderbilt, or Mrs. Vanderbilt specifically, actually. So this is a way for the Vanderbilts to show off the connections and the juice that they have. On the two further tables, there's other portraits signed as well. These are from royalty, say, like the Prince of Wales, who was future King George V, for example. So they really want to show off that they are accepted in higher society and that they're invited to these better parties at this point. And particularly for their business partners coming through here, that if you invest with New York Central, things can happen with us. So that's kind of the idea there. Yeah.
What do you think the Vanderbilts would think about so many commoners walking through their mansion now?
It's really hard to say because, the Vanderbilts, when they were not here, from my reading, they would open up the grounds to the locals of Hyde Park, many of them being families of the people who worked here. I don't imagine they would be super fond of people walking through their house here. Even just working here, there's heavy lines of classes, and if you were new here as a worker here, for example, it might take the Vanderbilt some time to get used to you and know your name. So they'd use analogs like John and Mary, for example, until, if they ever did, learn your name here for the most part. So hard to speculate on what dead people would feel about, 90 years down the line here. But I don't imagine that this being kind of more a private, intimate space for them, they'd be super happy that the general public's walking through here. Consider this, would you be happy if people were just walking through your house and judging all of your decor and style? I imagine not for the most part. I kind of welcome judgment, but I'm a weird guy, I work here, so. Okay. Other questions?
Yeah, the two tapestries in this room over here, Frederick Barbarossa, or do we know who that is?
No clue, actually. So my understanding is those are Flemish tapestries dating to the 17th century, so we're talking 1600s. They depict, the Trojan War, essentially. So we're seeing like King Agamemnon on one side, and you can see the other two tapestries in the living room proper. One shows the siege of Troy, actually. That's the best I know, because a lot of these items don't have necessarily markings or signatures. We kind of have to guess just based on what the Vanderbilt's many receipts say to us. Some things we can make better guesses than others. Like I said, this is Medici tapestry. That's their family trust center. As to which Medici or where that home originally, that's kind of lost to us. So, we're somewhat limited unless it has like signatures or carvings or something like that. Yeah. No problem. Go for it.
You know where they sourced all the green marble from?
Yeah, so my understanding it's Mediterranean, it's Greek marble purchased through Italy, and it's referred to as Cipollina Verde marble. So it means little green onions. My Italian accent is terrible, but this is real deal marble that we're all looking at. You're walking on white Carrara marble as well. This is the type of marble that another visitor told me that Michelangelo loved using for its texture and tone and things like that. But yeah, we have even the materials imported in it as well. Really the few domestic items you're going to see are the light fixtures, the plumbing fixtures, and the steel superstructure to the house here, which when you look around the smaller staircase, which we're going to go down on a little bit, gives you an insight into that, but kind of hidden away, kind of clad in all this European style instead.
And the woodwork.
The woodwork, yeah, so that's Russian walnut in there, and they bring in Swiss wood carvers actually, specifically to carve those woods. So some spaces you were asking me, Miss, about, did they bring objects over and then install them? Fireplace is pretty much the case, but other architects they would send over or bring in workers to fit these spaces custom to look like some of these lodges or salons and things like that here. So it's kind of a mix and match depending what you're looking at.
Do you know the vintage on the flintlock rifles in the wall?
Those, I mean, I know they're Spanish flintlock rifles. I believe they date to the 1600s as well, but I would have to double check those specifically to give you a hard date on them. Again, they're one of these items that we just have receipts for, and unless they have like the carver's initial in that, I don't know it off the top of my head, but I'd have to check. Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
those murals, are they painted or are they paper or what?
Yeah, so the murals you see on the ceilings in both the dining room and the reception room there, both of those are painted onto the ceilings. The Vanderbilts did get canvases as kind of like tester pieces to see how they feel about it at first. And then the artist, after getting the thumbs up, would paint it directly to the ceiling like a fresco. Apparently the Vanderbilts only like the one in the dining room because the one in the reception room is covered up. And you'll note if you look in the ceiling of the living room, there's a blank space there. They never completed the final painting there. And what's found is letters between the Vanderbilts, the architect, and the artist saying, well, we really like what the work you have done, but we're going to go with another artist and architect so we can fulfill the full vision that you've had. Really a nice way of saying, like, thank you, but no thank you. Here's your money. We no longer want your services. So they actually whitewashed the one in the reception room, and that's not discovered till the 60s when a park project is going on, and we've uncovered it since then to show it off here in the house. Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to open up this main staircase. We're going to head on upstairs. I don't like people to feel trapped, so we're going to limit time and questions upstairs on the second level. So hold all of them until we get down to the basement, or if it's something really quick, I'm going to try and avoid long diatribes like we're doing right now, just so that we can see everything and get down to the basement and we can exit. Once we go upstairs, do a full circuit again, hit the ground running. You want to see Frederick and Louise's bedroom. That's going to be across the hall above where the living room is, and it's going to be the largest bedrooms on the floor. Frederick's on the right-hand side. It's a little discombobulated because they're restoring tapestries that were in his room, so everything's been moved aside, his rug rolled up. But you get a chance to see some of the wood carvings and other detail work that typically you do not get to see on this tour. So look close for some of those things if you're interested in that type of stuff. You'll definitely see Mrs. Vanderbilt's bedroom on the left. It's very much the same style as the reception room downstairs. Think Marie Antoinette's chambers at the Palace of Versailles. That's what she absolutely wanted you to think. While the rest of the rooms are going to be guest bedrooms on the second floor. I will mention now there is a third level above the second level. It's 17 more rooms. There are 5 additional guest rooms and 12 rooms for the maids. We don't get to go there, unfortunately, because again, no fire exits. But I think it's important to note that there is a third level full living space for additional guests and the staff here inside the house. So you'll see other staircases going up. That's where those lead to. But if we're all set, I'll open up this main staircase. If you're looking to touch something original and already haven't snuck something when I wasn't looking, feel free to use this handrail. It's lined with velvet like many opera houses in this era, so get your money's worth on the way upstairs. And don't be shy, head up, take a look.
Thank you.
All right. And remember, you can stop moving for 8 minutes. Be ready for that.
Short stairs, I wish we had that.
Ooh. Nice.
This was Louise's bedroom. French.
Nice. The Versailles bedroom.
Yeah, Versailles bedroom. And the last time I was here, this one didn't have the rugs rolled up, and the ceiling and mantel is impressive anyway. Oh yeah, look at that ceiling. Here, you should come here and see that. Look how ornate it is.
Is that their bedroom or is
It was Frederick's.
Yeah, the bedroom. Was,
Yeah, because he said he was working on it. That's why I
Versailles bedroom.
Oh, your bedroom.
ooh. The forbidden third floor.
Something I still talk about a lot of people that
And I like that little ladder.
Yep.
Up a level.
tab and like know who's the last person choice.
Your bathroom over here.
Oh, yeah. They were very sanitary. Bathrooms were always white.
Yeah.
Sanitation.
Porcelain. Uh-oh. Dripping paint on the ceiling.
Oh, yeah. This bedroom was pretty nice. I'd take that.
We'll take it.
Notice the wardrobe. None of these rooms have closets because they didn't have closets. They had wardrobes. And they had like 3 dresses. That's it.
They probably had a couple more, I would think.
Yeah, but I mean, if, in general,
Yeah.
people didn't have a closet. We do now.
And they would be all tailor-made. They did have a sewing machine at this point, but
Yes. And they also had, like you said, they had seamstresses and tailors. They didn't go to H&M.
yes, the gap.
So above us here, it's the same type of opening. The only difference is that it's a wall from floor to ceiling essentially, and there's windows from the staff side that poke out into it so they can get to the skylight and clean it. It's basically like a flue in the chimney. It's hollow all the way up to the glass skylight at the top of the house here. And this skylight can actually open in total. So they would even use this for airflow here in the house where you have these tiny restricted spaces go further up, forcing airflow onto the top of the house. So they can use that for little drinking. But yeah, no, it's, I'm gonna have to do a consistent plan. So the only thing is no for air the one at the top, so this lay light here is a permanent gap of about 2-3 inches to help that airflow. There's another skylight from the roof of the house above the 3rd floor even that can open and close on fully wishes. And that's clear glass, it's all natural lighting on the escrow down here.
The bathrooms, I'm just curious, like what amenities did they have in the bathrooms?
I mean, basically toilet, tub, and sink for the most part. They have hot and cold running water. I'm not-
Flushed? They
Yeah, flush toilet. Yeah, so I
the-
mean, like it's got the gravity fed for the long chain up there just to get that water pressure that they need. On the roof, there's a water cistern, rain collecting. Then later on, they add a water tower across the roadway so that it's always filled up there. And then initially, they had just had a pump station going right into the river, which is one reason I would say not to go swimming in the Hudson River even today. Even though many people still don't pump into the river, water's got to flow somewhere, right? So. You know, even back then, I mean, we have a septic system now, but it's not like this is really used. It's more for the main visitor center. But there is still some running water in this house. They check systems every once in a while, but most of the bathrooms we see on display are dry today.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How many bathrooms total?
There are 14 bathrooms total in this house, 5 on this floor, and let's see, 2 on the lower level, and then the rest are spread out on the basement and the 3rd level above us for the guests and for the staff as well. We only really get to see 1 bathroom on this tour because it's the one closest to the hallway that we can walk on, and that's going to be connected to this guest room on the right-hand side here. I will tell you, it's basically a good representation for all the bathrooms. In the 1890s, it's not what your bathroom looks like, it's having plumbing, it's having hot water in the house. That's the bigger statement. And a side note, you're convincing people to take an outdoor activity using outhouses and chamber pots and things like that to bring that inside. So many bathrooms early on when they're developed are meant to look as sterile as possible, like hospitals or doctors' rooms, so that people can consider it clean and safe to go in. So, yeah. So kind of funny to us today, but back then, serious concern. Consider all of these fun, well, I'll say number 2 related diseases, diphtheria, cholera, all that good stuff.
Would you say it was heated with coal furnaces? Is that what it was?
Yeah, so if you look, there's vents and registers scattered all throughout. So it's a forced air system. I was just describing a few kind of helping those airflows here in the house with these constricting spaces as you go further up. So hot air naturally rises. Many of the air returns are in the center. Air vents pushing out the hot air into the room, so that way all the guests in the Vanderbilts get some warmer air. They never really need it since they're not here during the winter time. You do have the estate superintendent checking on systems throughout the winter, but nobody lives in this house year round, not even any staff. Most of the Vanderbilt staff that were in this house here, the 20 staff members, half of them travel with the Vanderbilts, or the other half are just seasonally hired, some of them through an agency, others were locals, and they're only here when the Vanderbilts are during the spring and fall.
So if you had that and the electric lighting, I guess you wouldn't have much need for the fireplaces.
No, for the most part, the fireplaces are just to have a country aesthetic here. So they did a cleaning of the chimneys a few years back, and it looks like they really only fired up the one downstairs in the main hall on a regular basis. So that when you walk inside from your traveling, you have a roaring fire in the fireplace, and you can go outside and nap on it. So it's more, I think, for aesthetic value, which again is just a great rule of thumb for anything you see in the house.
Okay.
What is that ladder?
Yeah, so in here we see one of the few servant spaces on this level. So you are looking at a linens closet that has a 2nd story in it. It doesn't go anywhere else. These are 18-foot ceilings in this level, and it's just extra storage space because every time you lay down your head here, they would change the sheets afterwards. And depending how many naps you take while you're here, that could be 3-4 times a day. So you have to have all the extra linens for all the rooms here prepared. Otherwise, it's 50 stairs up and down from the laundry room to the basement, which they probably had amazing paths, but still tedious. So.
And there's a big stack on that staircase.
A stack, I'm not sure what you
Right, great big.
Oh, so there's a drain pipe actually
That
installed
drain?
there. Yeah, so it's a flat roof, and that's one of the early installations by your Park Service in the 40s. Flat roofs, as you can imagine, always have issues with drainages and leak issues, and that is their solution. So the big pipe that you see in there, that's just a drain pipe installed, not original to the house. Any other quick questions so far? Yeah.
Weekly for those about that tour with you yesterday, and
Yes.
every room had a sign explaining what it was. How do you do that?
So here, I mean, it's been tried in the past, and it's more a preference of our head curator here. They are different site managers, site to site, and everyone has their own style, no matter what historic home you go to. And generally here, I mean, you know, a lot of the rooms are very similar. Guest suite, you know, and there's not any like notable visitors like at the Roosevelt home, I would say. So that's kind of like the main highlight there is to emphasize how Roosevelt used that home versus here the Vanderbilts, we can speak a little bit more generally since, you know, they didn't invite a lot of big players. This is closer friends and family business for the most part. Yeah. Okay. So if we're all set looking at these spaces here, what we're going to do now is head down the servant staircase to the basement of the house. Once you're down there, you're no longer my hostage really at that point. If you stick around, we're going to talk more about the staff and their day-to-day and their experience in the home. But there's a large door at the end of the hallway once you get downstairs. You can exit out at any point, head up to the rear world and beyond the rest of your day. But once you get down there, make sure you do take a good look around, see the kitchen, see their working space. Maybe you want to pause on the first floor landing just to look at the butler's pantry. That's where they would plate and arrange food that would come up by dumbwaiter from the kitchen. And if you get down to the very bottom and go to the left, you'll see that dumbwaiter itself. But if we're all set, feel free to head on down. Pardon me, folks, in this good and just all the way down. And do me a favor, since we have a larger group here, turn right into the large hallway where there's a bit more space and more things to see. Once I'm down, feel free to circulate back and check out the dumbwaiter and the head housekeeper's office.
One last question.
That's it.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah.
All right.
No, go ahead.
Does the Parks department do any touch-ups to the house, repainting or anything?
All the time. I mean, preservation's a process. So there's always something going on here. Unfortunately, things like plaster and paint, since they do not affect safety or our ability to tour the homes, they're low on the list. It is on the list, though. Things like, like pipes bursting or like a leaky roof or things that could affect the objects or people in the house, those tend to get the most attention. And then over time, as we get funding for certain projects like the tapestries in Mr. Vanderbilt's room.
Oh, and even restoring those.
And
tapestries.
restoring those,
Okay.
yeah, because I mean, many of these objects, they probably have not been touched since the day they were put up by the Vanderbilts. And,
Right.
we have experts come through, we contract out as much as possible, or I say try to do things in-house as much as possible and have to contract out some projects. But for the most part, yeah, there's always something to do in homes like this. And, we're seeing how the nicer spaces look because this is where the public generally goes. But trust me, some areas in the third floor and the basement are definitely not tolerable for sure.
Musty.
Yeah, musty, moldy, probably filled with some other, 19th century disease. Maybe the air really hasn't circulated since then. So
Snake skins.
yeah, you can probably smell the history going down those spaces.
Okay.
Yeah, stuff
Right.
like that.
Is the tour of the Roosevelt home about the same length of time?
It's a little bit shorter because it's a smaller house, but they're all slated for a full hour essentially. But there you have a bit more wiggle room. So
Okay.
yeah, here it just took 3 floors versus 2 there.
So this is plaster?
Yeah, most of it's going to be a mix of plaster. In some cases, a mix of like limestone. Just to give off the picture. So wood, like mold or gas, done with hand. So in the dining room itself, they actually take portions of the ceiling from the issue house and install it and build it down. They put it back like gas and other building. So they have their
Just thinking about running up and down the stairs with sheets in your hand. Laundry. The first one, that's the first. Every time somebody lies down.
Maybe they put those in the dumbwaiter too.
That would be a better idea.
Oh wow. Look at that little call box or whatever that is.
Oh, yeah.
That's cool.
This is the butler. Yeah, so there's 2 levels to it. There's all the stuff on the second level. And then later in the call outs as well. So throughout many of these companies, you'll find other stuff.
Dumbwaiter right there.
The mother.
Mother of pearl, of course.
This is busier than usual. This is busier than usual.
No, this is pretty much a standard size group for us. It's just a smaller space down here. So typically 3 or 4. If I'm lucky, I get 2 and I get to walk around. So behind me here, that's a head housekeeper's office. Yeah, she has her office at the bottom. Her suite is very popular. I would say she's the top in charge. Honestly, she reports directly to Mr. and Mrs. Vanderbilt. She's kind of parallel, but kind of like a diagonal parallel to the hip up there. She needs to hear all the back of the house and all the logistics here, the hiring. I would say like more front service employees here have all they need to make with the Vanderbilts. She's definitely a top customer here and has some of the most responsibility on the entire estate. She's one of these people that would probably be here early on to recall all the staff, recall all the hirings, and take a list of what needs to be done before everyone returns.
Icebox, I guess.
I think it's the refrigerator.
Or an actual refrigerator. Wow. Okay. No iceboxes here.
all the other staff have a chair back, and even the butler has a chair for his staff. Granted, they have their own space for the most part. But yeah, private bathroom, I think, says a lot about the type of respect and the agita she probably had for the most part.
Yeah, that must have been a pretty big gig in those days.
Oh, yeah.
Probably any of these jobs were good in those.
Yeah,
those
this was
very-
going to be my question for you all folks right now. So before I dive into my next diatribe here, any observations or other questions so far?
Was it a ice box or an actual electric refrigerator?
It's an ice box, actually. Yeah, and it always stays that way because when they built the house, that technology simply wasn't available. So for the ground crew, the 40 staff that worked outside, there is a full-time iceman, which they're very creative with names and job titles. He gathers ice, he stores ice, and he brings ice over. This was a full-time job. This was as regular as the milkman for people back in the day. And he would keep that cool just by stacking blocks of ice in the one corner of that ice box. When you go outside, if you look to the left, you'll actually see a cutout in the wall where you can drop it in that ice box and not even have to come inside, and to interfere with the main entry and exit for the staff here inside the house. You have a large walk-in cooler portion, and then smaller, more like our refrigerator and freezers at home, because every time you open those doors, you lose cold air, that's more ice, that's more work for everybody involved. And this was something the entire communities would do back in the day, is gather ice together and have a communal ice house that people would pull from. The Vanderbilts, being wealthy like they are, they had their own ice house in the property that they could pull from here. So yeah, anytime Frederick, and this is a historical fact, wanted his favorite treat, which was coffee-flavored ice cream apparently, that was always available for him.
So they're gathering ice. They're not making ice.
Yeah, so during the wintertime, everyone would come together, or commercial operations existed. Here in the Hudson Valley, they would pull from the river or freshwater lakes and ponds on the mainland, and then, yeah, carve and gather the ice. I mean, you can go online and look up some of this as well. I mean, they have specialized tools, augers and saws, and this just specifically to gather ice, and then all stored communally in just the local ice house, which, as it sounds, is a building filled with ice that they overproduced for, so they always accounted for melt off and things like that. So they always had plenty of ice, some years more, some years less, but they always accounted for that melt. Yeah. Other questions?
What's the oldest historical artifact, piece of art in the mansion?
Let's see. So it's a tie between two items, and I'd have to double check their specific dates. One is the dining room rug that we saw there. That is an Isfahan carpet that I believe dates to the late 14th century. We're talking late 13, early 1400s. The other one, I think that's pretty close to it. There's a tapestry going up from the second floor to the third floor. That's a Spanish tapestry dating to the late 1400s. That's something that like a King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were usually around with. So those are, I think, some of the older objects that we can confirm here in the house. Possibly older items, just because the nature of them purchasing antiques. But those are the items that we can confirm based on pedigree. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, of course. All right, so I've shown you all these grand Vanderbilt spaces today. Talked a lot about this lifestyle, and earlier on in this tour I asked you to keep in mind what is going on in the background. With that in mind, we're seeing spaces like this where a lot of the day-to-day working, the cooking and cleaning would take place. What do we think it was like for the staff working in spaces like this in the house? Exhausting. Yeah, these are 12-hour work days here for the most part. Maybe 1 hour off a day, and this is a rotating hour off. 1 day off a week again on a rotating basis. Again, there's always somebody on call to handle if the Vanderbilts or the guests need that coffee-flavored ice cream, for example, here. And keep in mind that all the cooking, all the cleaning, this is done pretty much manually. There's no appliances, really. There's no dishwashers. There's no laundry machines, no dryers. They have many of these items installed that were equivalent for the time, but they're kind of steam-fitted dryers and things that still required the staff to iron by hand and to starch, like my old Italian grandmother used to do, which, considering the changing sheets 3-4 times a day, particularly tedious to consider here. So yeah, these are full working days here for the most part. We're right above the furnaces downstairs. You have the kitchens, which are coal and wood-fired as well. This probably was a very hot part of the house as well, since the only forms of ventilation, as we can see, is this doorway here and this staircase. You can kind of feel the air sucking up as we are standing here as well. And so yeah, long days, but to keep in mind, you are working indoors in a house that has electricity, that has plumbing. As you were saying this wasn't a terrible gig for this work if you could get it here, because they are paying essentially what a family is earning to individual workers here in the house. The average income in this time period when the house is completed, say 1900, is around $400 a year, a little bit under for most families. I emphasize that is a family's wage. Individual earners, if you're the head of the household, or maybe making 50 to 75 cents a day for the most part, with your family supplementing the rest of that income. And I do mean your family, your wife, your spouse, your children, grandparents as well in some situations. And you're not working with the highest in society in most times, working indoors with all these nice amenities. Most Americans are farming in this time period, so you're doing backbreaking labor without augers or tractors and other technologies. Or you're in an industrializing society. You are working in mines, you are working in factories, you're working in slaughterhouses in this era. And considering that many of these jobs are over 14 hours a day, there's no OSHA mandated breaks, there's no weekends, there's no summer vacations really or anything like that. So you are working full time, and in some of these situations, if you read something like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, you are working in the Chicago meatpacking district in these slaughterhouses, ankle deep in animal parts for over that 14 hours a day. And you can read about how some people would fall into the vats and become part of the product. No FDA and people not knowing where their food is being sourced from. I will note here the Vanderbilts had 500 acres of farmland. The staff are basically eating the same nutritional value what the Vanderbilts are eating here. Not the same presentation because the sous chef's cooking for them and they imagine they're grabbing their meals when they can, but they don't have to worry about where all their food, their meat is coming from here, like many Americans did have to consider up into the mid-20th century in some cases. If you've ever listen to folk songs from this time period as well, you can hear about the plight of other workers working in coal mines in Appalachia, like West Virginia and Kentucky. One of these songs is 16 Tons, and I happen to know the Tennessee Ernie Ford version. I imagine if I started singing, we'd all be able to sing along to a certain degree, talking about the plight of these people in company towns where they're essentially in debt slavery, working that 14 hours without seeing sunlight that entire time. And say something happened to you, accidents are often, and death was regular during this time period, especially that type of work, where your children, as young as 5 years old, in many situations could be expected to pick up the slack for you in that case, to keep filling up these mine carts. And then to further go on with that, if you've seen photographs taken by Jacob Riis in this era, you can be in a city and not be in the same great situation either, working in sweat shops essentially, working in the garment district, say in the Lower East Side. Has anyone ever been to the tenement apartments in New York City at the museum down there before? Yeah, so I mean, you can see apartments that are about 700 square feet or so, where up to a dozen, maybe 15 people are sharing these spaces. Since you asked about the rug earlier, that rug in the dining room I mentioned, that is 800 square feet. That is larger than most of these apartments in New York City. And they did not have bathrooms and electricity in many cases, no fire exits, until something like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, which was one of many accidents in urban areas that brought about some changes to building codes in this time period. So always consider that as you go through these spaces, that for people even working here in this close Vanderbilt orbit, this is not your standard working employment situation. It's interesting to note that you could be working here in this house, earning as much as a family is earning, and if you're a seasonal staff member, only working half the year, they pay the full wage for those seasonal staff members. So I think of it as being paid a retainer and expected to be recalled, but half a year's worth of work for essentially a family's wage. People will travel on this, safe and upstart businesses of their own. But if you're working a quarter mile down at the edge of the property on those railroad tracks for the New York Central Railroad, essentially working for the same person, albeit a little bit indirectly, having a very different working experience, replacing railway ties in the hot sun, earning a third to a fifth of what somebody in this house could be earning, and I don't think those gentlemen would be allowed to use the bathrooms in this house either.
No.
So it's really important, to consider how close you are to families like this, that this is not pretty standard during this time. And while we've got a chance to see all these things, enjoy everything, talk about this very extravagant lifestyle inside the house here, to keep in mind that broader context of what is happening to everyone else in America in this time period as well. With that, I hope you've enjoyed seeing some of these spaces today, and I always enjoy bringing groups there. But at this point, I have shown you everywhere that I am allowed to show you today, and this brings us to the end of our tour at this point. I'm going to be here for a few extra minutes. If you have any other lingering questions, you just want to chit chat, I'm paid by the hour, so feel free to hold my time. Your exit is this door at the end of the hallway. Up and to the right brings you back to ground level. Feel free to walk around the park, check out these 200 acres, gardens, grounds, trails going to the river. Thank you for supporting your national parks and public spaces. I hope you all have a great day, safe travels, and please go for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Laundry room, we do not get to see it, unfortunately. It's still
Gonna ask
it's
him if he
further down the
accepts
hallway on the
tips.
left-hand side here. All these
Can I have
services
some?
are in these spaces here.
Yeah.
We
Because
don't
he's a
see
ranger,
these
that might make it.
Are you allowed to accept tips?
I would love to accept tips, but I cannot leave.
Okay.
Which I always find very funny, since that type of rule is mandated by Congress, and that's as political as I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
This wall here has a hinge. Is that good for
or down?
Yeah, there's a
cellar,
sub basement
or-
beneath us. It's like your classic unfinished basement with the heating units, the water heater, storage for the coal. They would even store furniture in the off season. So one suite upstairs had all the coverings on the bedroom furniture. They would even store things in the basement and the attic. So this would open up to lower these items by rope and pulley. It is about a 10-foot drop, which is why we removed the handles and didn't really want you to sue us, right?
I just want to ask about the bell system. Is there anything like, would there be a bell in each room that can?
So early on, when they first built the house, they had an annunciator system, so basically two pipes connecting from the kitchen to the butler's pantry to the main bedrooms. Later, they would have a call system installed, so mother referral buttons were installed with an electrical system to call boxes in the butler's pantry or upstairs at the third level by the maid's main office there, the head housekeeper's suite. So there's always someone on call on either one of these levels that would attend to whatever room gets lit up. So every room near the doorway has those buttons. If you go back to the visitor center, a great example is in the doorway leading to the bathrooms on the right side next to the bookcase on the wall there.
Okay.
And it'll say butler on the side. And that's pretty much the main system for it. And by the 20s and 30s, he has a telephone, so you can just call up and be like, bring me up ice cream.
Oh, nice. That was the most common call. Yeah.
Thank you, Will.
No, of course. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Very much.
I've got a quick question.
Please, yeah.
If you don't mind.
Not at all.
So you also do tours at the FDR?
I do.
Okay, so when I was on their website, so you get the ticket for the library museum.
You can get that online, yes.
Right, which I did, but I didn't see anything about how you do the estates.
So the only way to see the FDR home Springwood is by purchasing tickets
you wanna
in
ask another
person
question?
at the site there.
Okay,
It's like
okay.
here where we don't have an online reservation
Right,
system.
okay.
Early on this season, we didn't know what our staffing situation would be.
Thank you very much.
No, thanks
Appreciate
for
it.
coming. We didn't want to promise tours that we couldn't follow up on. So
Right,
our
so
management
windows.
this year decided we're not doing reservations. It's first come, first served only.
Oh, so this would have been where the
The main
staff
visitor
is?
center there.
This is the staff
I guess so. Yeah.
dining room? Oh, not bad.
They got some zeros on the wall. Look at that.
Oh, yeah. So they must have, they were here in the summer, so they must have hung all that laundry outside somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. They didn't have their. Oh, this must be the maybe or a horse stable. I don't know.
I don't know, he said when you go inside, you see something for the SER.
Oh, it must be. Okay, so it is an ice house.
My father never got past calling it the icebox. He didn't. He called it the icebox the day he died.
The ice
You know,
box.
that's what he had as a kid, so he never got past that.
Not too shabby.
Back into Gosport.